They told you time was linear, a straight line from birth to death, measured in seconds, minutes, and hours. But what if time was a prison? A cage built not of iron, but of symbols. For thousands of years, one shape has whispered its silent command over empires, religions, and even your own mind. The Black Cube. From the altars of Saturn to the skyscrapers of modern finance, this cube has been carried, worshipped, feared, and hidden. Today, we uncover its forbidden story, the secret power behind time and control. Hey, call it a symbol of silence, a shape so simple yet so heavy with meaning that civilizations across time bowed to it without fully knowing why. The cube, 6 faces, 8 corners, 12 edges. To the ordinary eye, it is nothing more than geometry, neutral, inert, a child's block. But to those who dared to look deeper, to those who could sense the invisible architecture shaping the visible world, the cube was never just a cube. It was a key, and it was a prison. From the temples of Mesopotamia to the Kaaba in Mecca, from the Black Cube monuments in New York and Copenhagen to the checkerboard floors of Masonic lodges, the cube stands in quiet defiance. It is everywhere and nowhere. People pass it daily, etched into corporate logos, woven into architecture, hidden in plain sight as though daring us to notice. But the few who ask why this shape, why this presence, why this constant return, often find themselves staring into an abyss older than memory. Because the cube is not only a symbol of matter, stability, and order, it is the reminder of something binding us, something ancient, something that has been watching. The Sumerians, among the first architects of civilization, aligned their ziggurats with the heavens, building step pyramids that resembled mountains carved into cubic forms. To them, the cube reflected Saturn, the god of time and limitation, the slow-moving planet of cycles, boundaries, and inevitability. Saturn, whose glyph is the scythe, whose shadow is the endless ticking of mortality. The cube, then, was not merely a design. It was a container of time itself, a box that traps the infinite within the finite. Even in modern physics, echoes of this truth remain. Space itself, when measured and mapped, falls into grids, coordinates, lattices, invisible cubes stretching infinitely. Our cities are laid upon square grids. Our buildings rise as rectangular prisms. Our time is measured in boxed calendars. Every layer of human life, consciously or unconsciously, has been organized into the pattern of the cube. But who set that pattern? Who decided that reality itself must be arranged in squares, boxed, categorized, controlled? The Black Cube is more than an object. It is a mask worn by power. To one initiate, it is the Holy of Holies, a temple that binds the divine into the material. To another, it is a prison, a coffin of consciousness. And to those who rule in shadows, it is both, a way to control time, perception, and the flow of energy in human societies. They keep it in front of us, precisely because we don't see it. And yet, you are beginning to notice. The cube is no longer invisible. It whispers through architecture. It haunts the logos of banks and corporations. It stands in public squares in defiance of reason. Its mystery is an invitation to ask, to remember, to see. Because once you see the Black Cube, you cannot unsee it. And once you know its story, you will realize it has been holding the keys to your life, your time, and your freedom from the very beginning. Beneath the shifting skies of antiquity, civilizations looked upward and saw not merely stars, but patterns, laws, and hidden structures. Among those celestial mysteries, one figure rose with undeniable power, Saturn. The ancients did not see Saturn as just a distant planet glowing faintly in the night. They saw it as the anchor of time, the slow-moving ruler whose cycles carved history into measurable rhythm. Its rings, invisible to the naked eye, were not known, but its gravitational pull on the mind of humanity was immense. And with Saturn came a symbol, the cube, a shape as stable as stone, yet as infinite as the heavens. The cube was never just geometry. It was sacred order itself. 6 sides, perfectly aligned, with a center that suggested balance, stillness, and permanence. To the Pythagoreans, numbers were divine, and the cube represented the solidity of the third dimension. Plato, in his dialogues on creation, spoke of the cube as the solid assigned to Earth, the perfect manifestation of matter. But when paired with Saturn, the planet of boundaries, discipline, and time, the cube took on a weight far greater than simple mathematics. It became a vessel of cosmic law, an earthly mirror of a celestial governor. Across Mesopotamia, Saturn was worshipped as Ninurta, and later Kronos, the devourer of ages, the slow master of cycles. Temples built in his honor often incorporated the square and the cube, anchoring spiritual reality to the physical plane. The Hebrews, inheriting and transforming ancient wisdom, placed the Holy of Holies inside a perfect cube within the Temple of Solomon. That hidden chamber, 20 cubits by 20 cubits, was not designed by accident. It was the geometry of divinity, a cube where heaven and earth converged, where the Ark of the Covenant rested beneath golden cherubim, echoing Saturn's silent dominion over time and space. Sacred geometry whispers this: the cube is not just a box. It is a projection, a shadow of a deeper structure. When unfolded, the cube becomes the cross, a form that stretches across dimensions, linking above and below, within and without. This is why the ancients placed such reverence upon its shape. To them, it was a key to understanding the structure of reality itself. The cube was stone, hard, grounded, unshakable. But it was also star, an emblem of Saturn, etched into the rhythm of the cosmos. Modern physics, in its own way, affirms the intuition of the ancients. Space itself, some argue, is not a continuous flow, but a lattice, a grid, quantized, cubed, structured by unseen order. Saturn, with its gravitational pull and its symbolic associations, remains the marker of limitation, boundary, and form. The ancients knew it, even if they spoke in myth rather than equations. The cube was their way of mapping the invisible, their anchor between heaven and earth. And so, the cube endures, found in temples, in sacred chambers, in cosmic lore. It is a reminder that stone and star, earth and cosmos, are not separate, but reflections, 2 mirrors locked within a single shape. The cube tells us that order is eternal, and that time, no matter how heavy, always flows from the same cosmic source. Imagine a planet that has haunted human imagination for thousands of years. Saturn, the slow giant, the faraway sentinel moving methodically across the sky. To the naked eye, it looks like nothing more than a pale star. But for ancient astrologers, mystics, and priests, it was never just a distant light. It was the gatekeeper of time, the weaver of destiny, the shadow that placed limits around every soul's journey. Saturn was the planet of endings and beginnings, the lord of cycles, the one that marked the inevitable passage of hours, days, and lifetimes. And so, over time, it became inextricably bound to the most mysterious of symbols, the black cube. The cube itself is geometry made solid, 6 equal sides, a form of balance and symmetry. But beyond the simplicity of its design lies a darker truth. In the hidden teachings, the cube was tied to Saturn's role as the enforcer of cosmic law. Just as the cube traps space within its rigid boundaries, Saturn traps life within the chains of time. It dictates what must be learned, what cannot be escaped, and what must eventually end. This is why in both Eastern and Western traditions, Saturn was feared as much as it was revered. The ancients called it Chronos, time itself. In Vedic astrology, it became Shani, the stern judge who rewards only through suffering and discipline. If you look closely at Saturn's symbol in astrology, a cross over a crescent, it represents matter dominating spirit, form outweighing freedom, a cosmic reminder that life in this plane is not without weight, not without struggle. And what is the cube if not matter at its most compressed form? Dense, heavy, immovable. The cube is Saturn made visible, a crystallization of its energy in geometric form. And then there are the rings, those haunting circles that trap Saturn in a prison of its own design. Many esoteric traditions saw the rings as a boundary, a cosmic cube stretched outward into a circular form. The cube and the ring were one and the same, a representation of limitation, enclosure, the walls of the matrix that keep consciousness in. This is why so many secret orders linked the cube not just to Saturn, but to control itself. They saw it as the perfect emblem of order imposed on chaos, structure imposed on spirit. Look across history, and you'll find Saturn always lurking in the margins. The Romans called Saturday the day of Saturn. In Hebrew mysticism, the Sabbath, the day of rest, was aligned with Saturn's energy, the culmination of time and labor. The black robes of judges, priests, and mourners, echoes of Saturn's shadow. Even the association of the color black with authority, finality, and mourning stems from Saturn's domain. It is the keeper of karma, the planet that ensures every action meets its consequence. So when you see the black cube, know that it is more than a symbol. It is Saturn's fingerprint, a reminder that time is watching, that structure is inescapable, that every soul is weighed, measured, and bound. And perhaps most haunting of all, it whispers that no matter how far we reach for the stars, we are still living inside Saturn's cube. Beneath the sands of time, when humanity first looked to the heavens and tried to give shape to the invisible, they chose forms that carried power, weight, and permanence. Among these, the cube stood out not only as a simple geometric solid, but as a vessel of profound meaning. To the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India, the cube was never just a block of stone. It was the crystallization of cosmic principles, a bridge between human order and divine mystery. Its perfect symmetry whispered of balance, its stability symbolized permanence, and its 6 faces, always pointing outward, suggested the ability to hold the visible world together while concealing something sacred within. In Egypt, the cube was encoded in temples aligned with the stars and in the sacred dimensions of ritual objects. The Egyptians were obsessed with Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, and the cube became a silent testimony to it. In the geometry of their architecture, from the pillars of Karnak to the hidden chambers of pyramids, we see measurements drawn to echo sacred ratios, the golden mean, and the square root of 2. The cube embodied the earthly foundation upon which the eternal pyramid could rise toward the heavens. It was no accident that Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection, was often associated with squared thrones and cubic imagery. For to sit upon a cube was to rule not over chaos, but over a world harmonized by measure and weight. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the cube was woven into myths and temples that reached upward in ziggurats. These monumental stairways to the sky were more than architectural feats. They were three-dimensional prayers, rising from square foundations meant to mirror cosmic order. The Babylonian god Ninurta was often linked with cubes of stone, representing the building blocks of creation itself. Sumerian tablets, inscribed with cuneiform lines that intersected at sharp angles, mirrored the cube's own geometry. Even the Mesopotamian concept of me, the divine laws that governed all reality, was imagined as something structured, ordered, and squared. To them, the cube was the container of destiny, a cosmic chest where fate was measured and sealed. In India, the cube found its most profound spiritual home in the form of the Vastu Purusha Mandala. This sacred diagram, used in the architecture of temples and cities, was itself a square grid, the unfolded face of a cube. Each section of the grid was dedicated to a deity, with the central square reserved for Brahman, the unmanifest absolute. To build in accordance with this cube-shaped mandala was to align human dwellings with the very pulse of the cosmos. The cube represented stability, dharma, and the eternal balance between chaos and order. In Vedic rituals, the Agnikayana altar, designed for fire sacrifices, was constructed in layers of squares and cubes, symbolizing the layered structure of the universe itself. The cube was never inert. It was alive with cosmic resonance. Through these civilizations, separated by land but united by vision, the cube became a universal key, a sacred shape that encoded permanence, balance, and connection between heaven and earth. Whether carved in stone, drawn in diagrams, or raised in temples, the cube was a message that order exists, that time has structure, and that beneath the shifting sands of history, there are patterns eternal. And even now, as we look back at these ancient symbols, we cannot help but wonder if they were pointing to something far greater than stone, perhaps to a truth written in the stars themselves. When we step into the world of sacred geometry, the cube emerges not merely as a shape, but as a metaphysical cipher, a key to the underlying architecture of existence itself. Geometry was never about lines and numbers for the ancients. It was the divine language, the code through which the cosmos whispered its secrets to those who could see. Among the 5 Platonic solids revered by Plato and Pythagoras, the cube stands out, perfect in its symmetry, each side identical, each angle square, each plane mirroring stability and foundation. To the ancients, it was the symbol of earth, the most material and grounded of elements. The cube was not just matter, but matter organized, matter brought into order, into balance, into sacred proportion. In the esoteric traditions, geometry was a bridge, a way of mapping invisible laws into visible form. The cube taught that matter was not chaos. It was law, it was structure, it was spirit crystallized into density. Every corner of the cube reflected the principles of containment and limit, reminding initiates that while spirit was infinite, incarnation was finite. To live in the body was to live within boundaries. To exist in matter was to exist inside the cube. But the cube was not static. Mystics knew that within its perfect symmetry lay hidden doorways. If unfolded, the cube transforms into a cross, the sacred pattern at the heart of so many spiritual traditions. In this unfolding, the cube revealed its true purpose, not only to bind, but to open. The cube was the prison and the key, the wall and the path beyond the wall. It hinted that matter could be transcended, but only by moving through it with awareness. Nowhere does this symbolism become more eerily literal than in the skies above Saturn, At the planet's north pole, NASA spacecraft like Voyager and later Cassini captured something scientists still puzzle over. A massive, persistent hexagon storm system, six-sided and spanning tens of thousands of kilometers. A perfect geometric form locked into the swirling chaos of gas and atmosphere. For esoteric thinkers, this was no coincidence. The hexagon is the two-dimensional shadow of the cube. Look at a cube from the right angle, and what you see is a hexagon. That same symbol etched into the heavens upon the planet long associated with time, karma, and limitation, was taken as a cosmic message, a reminder that what we see in matter is only the surface of a deeper geometry. Sacred geometry always taught that the universe was structured by archetypal forms. The circle, symbol of eternity. The triangle, symbol of fire and divinity. The cube, symbol of earth, law, and boundary. In the hidden schools of initiation, adepts were trained to meditate upon these forms, to let the mind's eye penetrate their simplicity until a door opened. The cube revealed itself not only as earth, but as the very principle of incarnation. Some teachings even went further, suggesting that the cube was the key to manifestation itself, that the soul's journey into matter was literally the act of stepping into the cube. In this way, the cube was never only geometry. It was cosmology. It was philosophy. It was a map. And when Saturn reveals its hexagon, it is as if the cosmos itself is whispering, the prison of matter is not without design. The key is hidden in the shape of the cage itself. Those who learn to see geometry not with the eyes but with the spirit can turn the cube inside out, transforming matter into revelation and time into eternity. Time was never meant to be a straight line. The ancients saw it as a circle, a serpent swallowing its own tail, a wheel forever turning. Yet somewhere along the way, the circle was folded, sharpened, and pressed into the hard edges of the cube. Within its rigid shape, time was no longer the endless dance of beginnings and endings, but a box. Linear, measurable, and inescapable. The cube became the house of hours, the prison of minutes, the coffin of days. To step inside it was to forget eternity, and to believe in deadlines, decay, and destiny fixed in one direction. The sacred was reduced to a schedule, and the spiral was flattened into a calendar page. This shift did not happen overnight. It came with the rise of systems that needed order, empires, religions, and machines. The cube offered certainty, but with it came confinement. Imagine a circle of fire. It burns without end, each spark feeding the next, an eternal return. Now imagine placing glass around it, shaping it into a cube. The flame still burns, but the boundaries force it into angles, corners, and limitation. That is what the cube of time has done to spirit. It convinces the soul that it is moving from past to future, birth to death, beginning to end. In truth, the soul is everywhere at once, spiraling in and out of moments, tasting echoes of futures already lived and past not yet remembered. But under the cube, those possibilities are locked away. We are trained to believe only in clocks, in numbers, in sequences. The cube becomes not just an object, but a worldview, a lens that insists time is a box we cannot escape. Ancient traditions warned of this. The Vedic seers spoke of the yugas, vast cycles of ages that repeat like seasons. The Maya carved calendars that looped and reset, never ending, always spiraling. The Egyptians inscribed the Djed pillar as a vertical axis of eternal renewal, not a cage of linear decay. Yet later systems turned away from these truths. In Judeo-Christian mysticism, the cube became the earthly container of spirit, a place where the divine presence was sealed within walls. In Freemasonry, the perfect ashlar, the squared stone, symbolized order, but also hinted at the taming of the wild, infinite spirit. And in Islamic tradition, the Kaaba, the cube at the center of Mecca, serves as a cosmic anchor, uniting the temporal with the eternal. The cube is always time, always boundary, always container. But every box casts a shadow. The cube of time creates not only order, but the illusion of imprisonment. We measure our lives in hours and years, forgetting that the eternal self is not inside the box but outside of it, watching. Death, under this system, is painted as an ending, rather than a turning of the wheel. The cube teaches us to fear the final wall, the last corner, the closing lid. Yet mystics across ages whispered that time itself is the illusion, and that the cube is only a mask. To step outside of time is to see that the box is transparent, that its walls dissolve when the spirit remembers. And so the cube stands as both teacher and trickster. It reminds us of the order that allows the play of matter, but it also dares us to believe that order is the whole of reality. The prison only exists until the soul realizes that every wall of the cube is made of light, and light has no edges. They say the desert hides its secrets in plain sight, and among the sands of Arabia, there is no structure more mysterious, more charged with energy than the Kaaba, a simple cube, black-draped, silent, yet circled by millions who move around it in unbroken spirals of devotion. To the outer eye, it is stone and cloth. To the inner eye, it is something much older, a key, a portal, a reminder of how the spirit has always danced around the mystery of form. The Kaaba's origins are shrouded in layers of tradition and myth. Muslims believe it was first built by Abraham and his son Ishmael, a house consecrated to the one God in a land of idols. Yet long before Islam, the Kaaba was already the sacred heart of Mecca. Ancient historians like Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described a highly revered temple in Arabia where tribes gathered for pilgrimage. Some traditions say the cube held over 360 idols, one for each day of the lunar year until Muhammad cleansed it. Others whisper of an even older sanctity, that the cube was not built but revealed, its foundation traced back to primordial times, when stones themselves were thought to be alive with divine presence. The Kaaba is covered in the kiswa, a black silk cloth embroidered with golden calligraphy, replaced yearly in a ritual of renewal. But beneath the fabric lies a structure that is deceptively simple. Granite walls, 43 feet high, oriented to the cardinal points. At its eastern corner is set the black stone, Al-Hajar al-Aswad. Pilgrims reach for it, kiss it, or gesture toward it as they pass. Scholars believe it may be a meteorite. Others see it as a cosmic relic, a piece of the heavens fallen to earth, marking the cube as more than geometry, as an axis, a meeting point between realms. The ritual of tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times, is not just symbolic. It mirrors the movement of the planets around the sun, the spiraling of electrons around a nucleus, the rhythm of galaxies around their dark centers. It is as though the cube anchors the human spirit into the same great spiral dance that governs the cosmos. To walk around it is to remember. The soul is part of a much greater orbit. Yet the cube itself is also paradox. To the mystic eye, it represents enclosure, linearity, the finite, spirit pressed into matter, infinity wearing the cloak of form. The Kaaba, then, becomes both prison and liberation. For the seeker who only sees stone, it is a box. For the one who perceives beyond, It is the doorway hidden within the box. And so the Kaaba remains the most enigmatic cube on earth. Millions circle it, praying, weeping, surrendering. Yet what they truly circle is not stone, but mystery. A reminder that even in the most ordinary geometry, the infinite hides, waiting to be seen, waiting to be remembered. In Judaism, the cube emerges not only as a shape, but as a vessel for mystery, a container of sacred intention and memory. Among the most powerful embodiments of this geometry are the tefillin, small black leather cube-shaped boxes bound with straps upon the arm and the head during prayer. Within these boxes rest handwritten scrolls of Torah verses, including the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. To the casual eye, they may appear simple artifacts of ritual, yet to the mystic, they are profound symbols of mind and body, heaven and earth, bound together through covenant. The cube, dark and minimal, becomes an anchor for infinite light. The mystics of the Kabbalah teach that the tefillin are not merely adornments, but conduits. The box worn on the forehead aligns with the seat of consciousness, the place of thought and vision, while the box bound on the arm points inward toward the heart, where intention, emotion, and action dwell. By wrapping the straps around the arm and hand, the worshipper enacts a binding of self, weaving body and spirit into alignment with divine will. The cube thus operates as a paradox, rigid in form, yet expansive in meaning, enclosing sacred text, yet pointing beyond text into the realm of eternity. In its geometry, the cube represents limitation, the boundaries of matter, the physical world, with its measurable dimensions. But the tefillin remind us that even within boundaries rests the infinite. The cube houses the Word of God, and in doing so, the finite form becomes a gateway to the infinite presence. The Zohar, one of the central texts of Jewish mysticism, often emphasizes this interplay, how the vessel and the light must always correspond, how the outer shape restrains and channels the inner radiance. The cube is not a prison here, but a container, holding what otherwise could not be contained. Scholars note that the practice of binding sacred words to the body originates from the Torah itself, where the command appears, "You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes." Deuteronomy 6:8. The cube then becomes the literal embodiment of divine instruction, a physical manifestation of memory, a reminder of covenantal union. Yet for the mystic, it is more than obedience, it is initiation. By entering prayer with tefillin, one steps into a microcosmic temple, the body transformed into sanctuary, the heart into altar, and the cube into the Holy of Holies. In this way, Judaism weaves the cube into its most intimate ritual, transforming what appears rigid into what is living, what is finite into what is infinite. The cube reminds the worshipper that time is bound, that life is measured, but also that within the measured moment burns the flame of the eternal. To bind the cube is to bind the self to remembrance, and in remembrance to glimpse the unending light hidden within the shape of limitation. Beneath the layers of Christian tradition lies a vision so striking that it seems almost architectural in its precision. In the book of Revelation, the Apostle John describes the descent of the New Jerusalem, a heavenly city prepared as the dwelling place of God and humanity united at the end of time. What astonishes scholars and mystics alike is not only the imagery of radiant walls, pearly gates, and streets of gold, but its shape. The New Jerusalem is described as a perfect cube, its length, breadth, and height equal, measuring 12,000 stadia on each side. This detail is often overlooked in casual readings, but for those attuned to the symbolism of sacred geometry, it becomes a revelation within the revelation. The cube, long seen as a vessel of order, grounding, and divine perfection, emerges as the final image of creation restored and humanity reconciled with the divine. Why a cube? In ancient thought, the cube represented stability, permanence, and wholeness. It has 6 faces, all equal, embodying balance and symmetry. Unlike a pyramid, which points upward, or a sphere, which suggests endlessness, the cube is grounded, anchored, and unmoving. When Revelation imagines the New Jerusalem as a cube, it signals a cosmic order re-established, a return to the primordial harmony. Some scholars have pointed out the parallel with the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, which was itself a cube-shaped chamber, 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits, the inner sanctum where God's presence was believed to dwell. The cube becomes therefore the architectural symbol of divine indwelling, a form that holds the presence. Mystics across centuries have meditated on this geometry. The cube is not just a structure, but a message, a revelation coded into architecture. Just as the Israelites carried the Ark of the Covenant into the cube-shaped Holy of Holies, so too the vision of the cube in Revelation signifies that the entire city, and by extension the cosmos itself, becomes the dwelling of God. No longer is the presence hidden behind veils or contained within a chamber. Instead, the perfected creation itself is the cube, and humanity is invited to live within it eternally. Some interpreters, particularly within esoteric Christianity, have suggested that this cubic form points to a union of heaven and earth. The equal sides of the cube embody harmony between dimensions, collapsing the divide between what is above and what is below. Others note the numerological resonance of 12,000 stadia. 12 is the number of the tribes of Israel, the apostles, and cosmic order, magnified to cosmic proportions. Here, geometry and theology intertwine, and the cube becomes not just a form, but a prophecy of balance, unity, and sacred dwelling. Pause for a moment. Imagine standing before that vision, a city descending, not sprawling endlessly, but ordered, radiant, and complete, a perfect cube of light. It is both a structure and a symbol, the divine architecture of a cosmos finally healed. In the end, Revelation whispers, the truth is not chaos but order, not exile but home, and the home of the soul is shaped as a cube. In the traditions of Western esotericism, the cube appears as a hidden initiatory emblem, carrying meanings that transcend geometry. Secret societies such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other occult orders often veil their wisdom in architecture, allegory, and symbol. Among their sacred symbols, the cube is especially profound. It represents the perfected stone, the ashlar that has been hewn, squared, and made ready for placement within the temple of the spirit. In Masonic teachings, the transition from the rough ashlar to the perfect cube is nothing less than the transformation of the human soul, shaped by discipline, cut by experience, and refined by truth until it can rest in harmony within the greater architecture of the cosmos. The ritual of initiation in Freemasonry often includes the confrontation of symbols designed to awaken recognition in the candidate. The cube is set before them as a silent teacher. On one level, it reflects stability, balance, and mastery over the material plane. Its 6 equal faces signifying equilibrium in all directions. On another, it whispers of the concealed divine, for within the cube can be inscribed the sphere, a symbol of spirit hidden inside matter. This duality, the seen and the unseen, the external and the internal, forms the heart of occult transformation. Beyond Freemasonry, the cube is found in alchemical diagrams, Hermetic writings, and Rosicrucian imagery. To the alchemists, the cube was a crystallized expression of salt, the principle of fixation and solidity. Yet within that salt was the potential for transmutation, for even the densest matter could be spiritualized. The Rosicrucians spoke of the cube as the foundation stone of the invisible temple, suggesting that the seeker must square themselves with divine law before ascending into higher mysteries. In each tradition, the cube does not simply represent material form, but the passageway through which the initiate must walk to find spirit concealed in structure. Occultists also drew upon the cube to embody the mysteries of the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters of the divine name. Each dimension of the cube was linked to an element: earth, water, air, and fire. The initiate, when placed within the ritual cube, was symbolically surrounded by the totality of creation, enclosed within the very name of God. From this perspective, the cube is not just geometry, it is a living container of divine resonance. The cube also served as a test of perception. To the profane, it appeared as a lifeless block of stone. To the initiate, it revealed dimensions of spirit within matter, order hidden beneath chaos. It was both a key and a lock, opening the path to wisdom only for those prepared to recognize it. The occult cube reminds us that every solid wall may hide a secret door, and every stone may carry within it the blueprint of eternity. The cube, in its silent geometry, has long stood as a symbol of order, structure, and containment. Within sacred traditions and esoteric teachings, it is more than stone or shape. It is the prison of the mind. When mystics speak of awakening, they often describe a breaking free from the box, an unshackling of the inner sight from rigid lines that confine the spirit. The cube becomes a metaphor for the invisible walls we construct around ourselves. Belief systems, cultural narratives, and unquestioned truths that seem as solid as stone but are, in truth, made of thought. Like a child born into a room with no doors, we learn to mistake the walls of conditioning for the edges of reality. The cube becomes not only a shape outside of us, but the prison within. Philosophers from Plato to Jung pointed toward this same confinement. Plato's allegory of the cave, where shadows are mistaken for reality, reflects the cube of the mind, a space where perception is narrowed and truth is obscured. Carl Jung, in his writings on the psyche, spoke of archetypes and the collective unconscious as frameworks that shape what we can imagine and believe. These frameworks become invisible cubes, not oppressive by force, but by familiarity. The prisoner does not struggle against the cube because he cannot see it. He is too accustomed to its angles. In mystical traditions, the cube appears as the perfected stone of the mason, yet it is also the unawakened state. The initiated Freemason, for instance, is taught that the rough stone must be polished into the cube, representing discipline, stability, and moral foundation. But in deeper layers of symbolism, the cube is also a trap, a warning. It signifies the completed box of the rational mind, precise, orderly, and closed. In Kabbalistic thought, the cube links to the earthly realm, the dimension of Malkuth, the kingdom, where spirit is densest and furthest from source. To live only within the cube is to remain bound to the lowest expression of being, mistaking form for essence and limit for truth. The cube is also echoed in architecture. The houses we build, the offices we inhabit, the screens that frame our lives. Each square, each rectangle, reinforces the geometry of containment. The mystic knows that the cube is not only external, but internal, the set of mental patterns that trap consciousness. When the mind sees only in straight lines, the infinite spiral of spirit is forgotten. To awaken is to glimpse beyond the cube. This is why so many esoteric traditions speak of the breaking of seals, the shattering of illusions, the cracking open of stone. Gnostics describe this process as awakening from the prison of the demiurge, the false creator who binds souls in matter. Buddhists, in another language, speak of samsara, the endless cycle of conditioned thought. Both point to the same prison, the cube of the mind, where we mistake repetition for freedom. But the cube is not evil. It is the necessary first stage, the form into which spirit descends to know itself. To escape the prison of the cube does not mean to destroy it, but to see through it, to understand that it is scaffolding, not the house. The mystic learns to walk its edges, to see its walls as transparent, to step through the geometry into the greater pattern. And in that moment, the cube dissolves, revealing not a prison, but a doorway. In the cities we walk through every day, there are symbols that blend so seamlessly into the architecture that we barely register their presence. Yet to those who study esoteric tradition, these forms are not neutral. They are intentional, placed with precision to echo ancient rites and to channel collective attention. Among the most striking of these is the black cube, a form that appears again and again in modern centers of power, commerce, and remembrance. At first glance, a cube may appear plain, even sterile. But when coated in black, when elevated in plazas or etched into the logos of corporations, it becomes something else entirely, a silent monument of control. Consider the corporate logos that dominate the modern world. Many of the largest financial institutions, technology firms, and even entertainment companies employ cube-like or square symbolism. The form speaks to stability, order, and authority, qualities that every empire of influence wishes to project. Yet hidden in this choice is also a message. The box is closed. What is inside is contained, structured, and ruled. Some researchers argue that these logos function as subliminal reinforcements of the mental and social structures we unconsciously obey. The cube, then, is not just a brand image, but an emblem of the system itself. In urban landscapes, the cube manifests in memorials that carry both reverence and enigma. Take, for example, the 9/11 Memorial in New York City. Two vast square voids descending into the ground, evoking both absence and infinite depth. Or the Kaaba in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, an enormous black cube draped in cloth, believed by millions to be the earthly reflection of a heavenly archetype. These are not casual constructions. They anchor the collective psyche, linking earthly ritual with cosmic order. The cube becomes not only a structure of stone, but a symbol of humanity's relationship to the infinite and of our obedience to higher or hidden systems. Financial centers, too, have embraced the cube as their silent icon. Across the world, towering banks and stock exchanges are designed as perfect square grids, black glass blocks rising into the sky. These buildings are not designed only for efficiency of space. They communicate permanence, immovability, the sense that this structure, like the cube itself, is eternal. When we pass them, we do not merely see a building. We unconsciously receive the message of stability in the system of money, the black box that controls our lives. But why black? In symbolism, black is the color of mystery, concealment, and absorption. It hides what lies beneath and gives no reflection. The black cube, therefore, represents not just structure, but secrecy. It is the opaque face of authority, the mask of a system that cannot be seen into, but that sees everything around it. Scholars like David Overson and Manly P. Hall have traced how secret societies use dark geometric forms to channel the psyche into obedience, reminding initiates that their journey is not into the light, but through the labyrinth of shadows. When these cubes are placed in public squares, on financial districts, or in the insignia of global corporations, they serve as quiet sentinels. Most passers-by never notice them, yet their presence works at a subconscious level, reinforcing the invisible architecture of power that frames our reality. It is the same ancient ritual of initiation, transposed onto modern life. Only now, instead of kneeling before the cube in a temple, the masses walk unknowingly beneath its shadow in the streets of the global city. From the beginning of recorded history, humanity has gazed up at the planet Saturn with a mix of awe and unease. Unlike the warm radiance of the sun or the nurturing cycles of the moon, Saturn's influence has always carried a weight, an association with boundaries, restrictions, and the passage of time. The ancients did not see Saturn merely as a distant planet circling in the dark. They saw it as a force, a cosmic archetype, a god that governs structure, limitation, and control. In Roman mythology, Saturn was the god of time, agriculture, and inevitable decay. His Greek counterpart, Cronus, devoured his own children, a chilling metaphor for the way time consumes all things. This symbolism seeped into nearly every cultural framework, embedding itself in how humans understood authority, order, and mortality. To worship Saturn was, in many ways, to acknowledge the iron chains of time itself. Over the centuries, Saturn's archetype has been woven into systems of control that define human existence. Time became measured, carved into rigid segments, and enforced through the mechanical tick of the clock. This was not always the case. Ancient civilizations lived by the cycles of the moon, the stars, and the sun, moving with organic rhythms. But with the Industrial Revolution, humanity fell deeper into Saturn's grip. The clock replaced the cosmos. Men and women became bound to schedules, to deadlines, to time is money. Work shifted from a natural cycle of labor and rest to an artificial cage of hours, minutes, and seconds. The modern obsession with productivity and efficiency is, in essence, a form of Saturnian worship, where life itself is sacrificed on the altar of relentless measurement. Saturn's influence is not just about time, but also about law and order. Its symbolism manifests in the rigid structures of governments, corporations, and financial systems. Laws are designed to restrict, to confine, and to regulate behavior. While laws create stability, they also impose invisible walls that can stifle freedom and creativity. Like the cube, a symbol so often tied to Saturn, the systems of law and finance present themselves as protective structures, but they are also prisons. Courts, parliaments, and banking institutions, with their strict hierarchies and codified rules, embody the essence of Saturnian authority, power through limitation. Esoteric traditions take this further, claiming that Saturn represents not only external control, but also internal enslavement. The chains of belief, societal programming, and unquestioned norms are Saturn's invisible rings. They bind the mind, preventing souls from seeing beyond the boundaries that culture and authority enforce. In astrology, Saturn's influence is described as karmic, the great teacher that brings lessons through hardship and restriction. Yet hidden within this difficulty is liberation. For once one sees the cage, one can choose to transcend it. Modern power structures, from legal systems to corporate hierarchies, still reflect Saturn's archetype. By placing emphasis on order, on punishment, on strict adherence to time and rules, they keep humanity locked in predictable cycles. To recognize Saturn is to recognize the ways in which control operates, quietly, persistently, and under the guise of stability. And to awaken is not to reject Saturn entirely, but to reclaim balance, remembering that time and structure can serve consciousness rather than enslave it. Beyond the walls of stone and temples of Saturn, ancient mystics whispered of forces not bound to the stars, but to the very architecture of reality itself. They called them archons. In Gnostic scriptures such as the Nag Hammadi texts, the archons were described as rulers and wardens of this material realm, not beings of flesh and bone, but powers of deception, weaving illusions that kept souls chained to the wheel of birth and death. They crafted a world where the spirit forgets its origin, where eternity is compressed into the ticking of a clock, and where the cube becomes more than a symbol, it becomes a cage. The cube, with its 6 sides and sharp edges, is not just geometry. It is the perfect metaphor for confinement. Every face is a wall, every corner a boundary, every angle an enclosure. To the Gnostics, it was the signature of the archons, a representation of how spirit is boxed into matter, how the infinite is forced into the finite. The cube is the prison house of the soul, and those who mistake it for their true home remain under the control of the gatekeepers. Look closely at the way the cube reappears throughout cultures. In sacred texts, it is hidden in the Holy of Holies as the Ark of the Covenant. In Islam, the Kaaba, a black cube draped in cloth, becomes the focal point of global devotion. In the West, modern cities place giant black cubes in plazas, memorials, and corporate hubs, each serving as silent reminders of this archetypal structure. The physical cube becomes a mirror of the metaphysical one, the soul trapped in matter, unaware of the radiant light that exists beyond its walls. Gnostic writings warn that the archons could not create, they could only imitate. They shaped the cube as a counterfeit order, mimicking the divine pattern while distorting it into limitation. Their goal was not to destroy the soul, but to distract it endlessly, to make it forget its wings. By binding human life to cycles of labor, laws, debt, and desire, they ensured that the cube remained invisible, yet inescapable. What seems like freedom is often just another wall of the box. But even within these teachings, there was hope. The Gnostics believed that the cube was not eternal. It was a construct, and like all constructs, it could be dissolved. Through knowledge, or gnosis, the soul could remember its source, pierce through the illusions, and rise beyond the cube's edges. This is why spiritual liberation was described as awakening, not because one changes the cube, but because one learns to see through it. So the cube is both a warning and a revelation. It is a symbol of confinement, but also a clue. For once you recognize the pattern, once you see the cube for what it truly is, you begin to understand that the walls were never absolute. They were paper-thin illusions, upheld only by the agreement of the dreamer. And the dreamer, beloved listener, has always been you. From the moment humanity gazed into the black mirror of the digital screen, a new cube was born, one not of stone or ritual, but of light and code. It is a cube we carry in our pockets, one we place in our homes, one that surrounds us in invisible webs of information. Just as the ancients saw the cube as a prison of spirit in Gnostic lore, today the cube has returned in digital form. We call it technology, progress, convenience. But beneath its polished surface, it has become an enclosure for the mind. The algorithms are architects of this cube. They feed us with endless streams of curated images, predictions, and desires. The illusion is controlled through choice, but the structure beneath is deterministic. Every click is tracked, every thought predicted, every action bent toward a system that thrives on your attention. This is not far from the warnings of simulation theory, which proposes that what we perceive as reality may itself be an advanced computational model. In this view, the cube of technology is simply a mirror of a greater cube that already encases us, one designed by intelligences, human or otherwise, that stand outside our perception. Screens themselves are portals, flat rectangles glowing with life, shaping our moods, our relationships, our sense of truth. They are not neutral. They are boxes designed to frame perception. And with each hour we spend gazing into them, our consciousness conforms to their borders. Time begins to feel fractured. Presence dissolves into endless scrolling. The cube teaches us to exist in fragments, to be more loyal to notifications than to the rhythm of our breath. It is subtle sorcery, turning the sacred act of awareness into a commodity. Artificial intelligence, too, enters this architecture. It speaks with voices not entirely its own, weaving language, images, and decisions into patterns that mimic thought. But at its core, AI is an extension of the cube. It is designed not to liberate, but to bind, to deepen dependence, to replace the organic with the synthetic, and to turn mystery into data points. The danger is not that it thinks like us, but that we begin thinking like it, pattern-driven, predictable, efficient, but hollow. The ancients built temples of stone aligned to the stars. Our era builds temples of code aligned to profit. Yet both structures reveal the same truth. The cube is a symbol of enclosure. The question is whether we recognize the cube for what it is, or mistake it for freedom. For the more time we spend in its glow, the more the edges of its prison walls blur into invisibility. And yet, even here, a choice remains: to use the cube as a tool rather than submit to it as a master. To remember that consciousness is not bound by glass or code, and that no algorithm can touch the eternal spark that observes it all. The digital cube may surround us, but it does not define us unless we allow it to. The lights dim in the theatre, and the screen flickers to life. From the very first frame, most of us do not realize we are stepping into a carefully constructed temple, one where symbols and archetypes work beneath the surface of story and spectacle. Hollywood has long been more than entertainment. It is a machine of myth-making, an oracle of dreams, and often a silent architect of belief. Within its layers, the cube appears again and again, sometimes literal, as in glowing boxes, digital grids, or strange geometric prisons. Other times symbolic, woven into set design, logos, and recurring visual motifs. To the casual viewer, these are just props, but to the subconscious, they are instructions, unnoticed but deeply felt. Take Stanley Kubrick, for example. His films often blurred the line between art and coded message. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, the black monolith stands as an inscrutable cube-like form, cold, black, rectangular, descending into human history as a catalyst for transformation. Critics call it an allegory of evolution, but to many esoteric interpreters, it is an icon of the cosmic cube, a structure both alien and divine, watching and shaping humanity's path. Notice the shape, perfect, rigid, imposing, appearing at the dawn of mankind, and again as man ascends into space. Was Kubrick revealing or warning? Hollywood does not invent these images in a vacuum. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, primordial symbols rooted in the collective unconscious, that resurface in myth and art across cultures. The cube, as a container, a box, a prison, and a portal, is one such archetype. In films, it often houses hidden truths or unspeakable horrors. Consider the Hellraiser franchise, where a puzzle box opens gateways to other dimensions, binding human desire with torment, or The Cube, a cult film where strangers awaken in a massive labyrinth of cubic rooms, punished by unseen designers. These are not random artistic flourishes. They are initiations disguised as entertainment. Predictive programming, a term first popularized by researcher Alan Watt, describes the subtle seeding of ideas through media, so that when they manifest in reality, the collective psyche is already conditioned to accept them. Hollywood has been accused of practicing this for decades, embedding symbolic cubes of control into stories that normalize surveillance, digital confinement, and algorithmic destiny. Think of The Matrix, where Neo wakes in a pod, a box within a system of infinite code. The film tells us we live inside a simulation, but by presenting it as fiction, it becomes easier to dismiss. Yet the subconscious does not dismiss. It absorbs, it prepares. Even seemingly innocent films use these patterns. In superhero blockbusters, cities are filled with cubic towers and glowing tesseracts, objects of ultimate power. Marvel's Tesseract, a cube containing infinite energy, is fought over as if it were the very heart of creation. The audience may not know that Tesseract is also the geometric form of a four-dimensional cube, a shape central to mystical mathematics and theories of higher realms. Hidden in plain sight, the cube becomes both entertainment and initiation, shaping how billions imagine power, control, and transcendence. What makes this profound is not simply the repetition, but the effect. Repetition imprints symbols onto the subconscious until they seem natural. When audiences see glowing screens everywhere in real life, or step into digital cubes of VR headsets, it feels like the world is only fulfilling what movies promised. Hollywood hides the cube in plain sight, not to inform, but to acclimate. And so every ticket we buy may not just be admission to a story, but to a ritual we never knew we agreed to. In science, the cube is not merely a shape. It is a fundamental building block of matter and a mirror of the universe's underlying order. Geometry has always been more than abstraction. It is a language. And the cube, with its equal edges and perfect symmetry, has long stood as a symbol of containment, of balance, and of boundary. In physics, these boundaries often emerge at the smallest scales of reality, in the strange world of quantum mechanics. Here, scientists have discovered that particles do not behave as particles at all, but as probabilities, shapes of potential that collapse into certainty when observed. The cube arises naturally in this realm, as a way to map dimensions of possibility, to divide infinite uncertainty into measurable spaces. One of the earliest glimpses of this came with Max Planck, who discovered that energy is not continuous, but quantized, packaged into tiny units called quanta. Imagine each of those quanta as a discrete cube of energy, a finite box containing what was once thought to be endless flow. In crystallography, too, cubes reveal themselves as the hidden architecture of matter. Salt, diamonds, and countless minerals align into cubic lattices. It is as if the universe, when left to arrange itself, favors this stable geometry. From the microstructure of crystals to the grand design of galaxies, cubes are present as a scaffolding of order within apparent chaos. The cube also carries meaning in dimensional mathematics. In Euclidean geometry, the cube is a three-dimensional projection, but when mathematicians extend dimensions beyond the third, the hypercube, or tesseract, emerges. This object exists in 4 dimensions, but when viewed from our limited perception, it collapses into strange, distorted projections of cubes within cubes. Carl Sagan once remarked that higher dimensional shapes appear to us as shadows of their true reality, much like a 3-dimensional object casting a 2-dimensional shadow on the wall. If the universe itself holds more than 3 dimensions, then the cube could be a window, a shadow cast from higher realities onto the fabric of our own. Quantum field theory expands this metaphor further. At the heart of physics is the concept of a vacuum state, the lowest possible energy field from which all particles emerge. Scientists often map this space as a cube of probabilities, energy levels rising and falling like vertices in a multi-dimensional grid. In string theory, the mathematics of vibrating strings that underpin matter rely on compacted dimensions often described with cube-like symmetries, hidden from perception but woven into the fabric of being. The cube here is no longer symbolic, it is structural, and still, the cube persists as boundary. In Schrödinger's famous thought experiment, the cat exists in a state of quantum superposition, alive and dead, until the box is opened. A cube once again serves as the container of uncertainty, a vessel that decides what reality will become when observed. The box is not neutral. It is the architecture of choice, of collapse, of revelation. Thus, the cube in physics is both cage and key. It defines the limits of perception, yet points beyond them. Each time scientists peer deeper into the geometry of matter, they find that the cube is never absent. It stands silently at the threshold, hinting that what we call reality may itself be arranged, measured, and bounded by the edges of an eternal geometry. In the language of mystics, the cube was never just a shape. It was a key, a hinge, a hidden doorway through which consciousness could slip beyond its ordinary boundaries. Ancient shamans, seers, and initiates believed the cube was more than geometry. It was a map of reality's edges, and when properly invoked, it could be walked through like a threshold. The 6 faces of the cube were said to be guardians, each aligned with a cardinal direction, each vibrating with the essence of earth, air, fire, water, spirit, and void. To the untrained eye, these were mere symbols, but to those who journeyed into altered states, the cube became a lattice of light, an interdimensional portal that could be activated through sound, vision, and alignment of the spirit. In Native American cosmology, the medicine wheel holds a similar structure, mapping the 4 directions, the above and the below. Some shamans describe it as entering a sacred space where the soul can travel beyond the body. Likewise, Tibetan mystics in the Dzogchen tradition speak of the thil, spheres of rainbow light, arranged within mandalas that resemble the cube's multi-dimensional structure. These were not abstract ideas. Through rhythmic drumming, entheogenic plants, or deep trance, shamans testified that the cube unfolded around them like a crystalline temple. Its edges were beams of light. Its interior was not empty but filled with humming, vibrating codes. To step into it was to step into a bridge that linked this world to the unseen realms. In Jewish Kabbalah, mystics mapped this same idea onto the Tree of Life, where the Sephiroth form a 3-dimensional cube-like lattice. Each pathway is not just symbolic, but a corridor of consciousness. Meditation on these paths was believed to shift awareness, allowing the initiate to ascend or descend through the many layers of creation. This teaching has echoes in Hermetic texts, where the cube becomes a stargate of the mind, an inner architecture that mirrors the outer universe. Here, the cube is both the prison of matter and the escape hatch from it. It holds you, but it also offers the key to leave. Modern accounts of near-death experiences and ayahuasca journeys echo these ancient testimonies. People describe finding themselves inside vast geometric structures of light, honeycomb grids, spinning lattices, and crystalline cubes that shimmer with intelligence. They report stepping through these shapes into other realities, sometimes guided by beings, sometimes carried by sound. The cube is not passive here. It is active, almost alive, rearranging itself as if testing whether the consciousness is prepared to move deeper. One wrong step, and the cube dissolves. One correct alignment, and the walls open like gates of fire and crystal. To the shaman, the cube is not just seen, it is felt. It vibrates in the chest, like a resonance chamber aligning the body to higher frequencies. When mystics spoke of passing through the eye of the needle or walking the narrow way, some suggest they were speaking of navigating this cube portal, where one must surrender the ego to slip through the spaces between worlds. The cube, then, is not a fixed form. It is a door, waiting for those with the courage to walk beyond what the eyes can see. It is both the box we live in and the doorway out of it. And for those who have walked through, they return forever changed, bearing the secret that reality itself is far larger than the prison of its walls. Saturn has long been regarded as a planet of mystery, discipline, and boundaries. In astrology, it is called the Great Teacher, the Lord of Time, the planet that tests and refines the soul through challenge. Yet in astronomy, there is a phenomenon at its North Pole that seems almost otherworldly. A vast storm in the shape of a perfect hexagon, 6 sides whirling around like a cosmic mandala, persisting for decades without dissolving. First discovered by Voyager in 1981 and later confirmed by the Cassini mission, this hexagon is not simply a random storm. It is 6-sided symmetry stretching thousands of kilometers across, large enough to swallow Earth inside of it. And when mystics look at this, they see not only weather, but geometry speaking through the heavens. The hexagon is the natural 2-dimensional projection of a cube. Imagine taking a cube, tilting it, and looking at its shadow. You will see a hexagon. To ancient initiates, this was a sign that the cube, the symbol of matter, form, and manifestation, was being displayed in the sky, carved into the very storms of Saturn. Science explains it as a standing wave pattern created by differential rotation of Saturn's atmosphere, a kind of planetary resonance where fluid dynamics naturally settle into geometric harmony. But what mystics see is resonance between dimensions, the material and the archetypal, the physical and the symbolic, entwined in one celestial phenomenon. In esoteric traditions, Saturn itself has been associated with the cube. The black cube is worn in ritual on the forehead in Jewish tefillin, and the Kaaba in Mecca, cubic in shape, is the holiest site in Islam. For the Kabbalist, the cube is Geburah, discipline and severity, attributes often linked with Saturn's influence. And so, when a literal hexagon, the cube's signature, is imprinted on Saturn's pole, it feels like a cosmic mirror of humanity's oldest symbols. Some researchers have connected this hexagon to sacred geometry on Earth. The hexagon appears in honeycombs, in the molecular lattice of graphene, in snowflakes, always signifying stability, efficiency, and balance. In Platonic thought, the cube was one of the solid building blocks of creation, associated with the element of Earth. If Saturn is the planet of structure and form, then the hexagon storm may be seen as its emblem, a natural cosmic affirmation of the cube's role in maintaining the architecture of reality. Mystics also whisper of Saturn's hexagon as a gate. Just as shamans view geometric symbols as doorways into altered states, so too is the hexagon seen as a portal. The cube unfolds into a cross, the hexagon folds into a cube, and the cube itself becomes the foundation of the temple. This storm, endlessly spinning at Saturn's pole, is like a reminder that beneath chaos there is order, and within order, a code pointing beyond matter itself. Whether read through the lens of physics or prophecy, Saturn's hexagon remains one of the most profound demonstrations of cosmic geometry, a storm that is more than a storm, a symbol written into the very atmosphere of the heavens. Underneath the fabric of history lies a darker truth that many ancient cultures understood, but rarely spoke of directly. The cube, which in its purest sense represents structure, limitation, and form, also became a vessel through which sacrifice was channeled. When mystics speak of Saturn's rulership, they do not only mean the planet in the sky. They mean the archetype of binding law, the devourer of time, the one who demands something in return for order. And so, across temples, blood-soaked altars, and secret rites, the cube became not only a symbol of containment, but of offering. To give something into the cube was to bind it into the contract of Saturn. The ancients knew that energy was never lost, only transmuted, and that ritual blood, life itself, was the most potent offering to seal such a pact. Pause. Imagine the black cube, polished and still, yet waiting like an ancient vessel. It is not just stone. It is a metaphysical container. When blood touched its surface, or when a ritual act was performed within its shadow, the cube absorbed not the liquid, but the vibration of sacrifice. Civilizations from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica enacted these rites, often beneath the guise of appeasing gods. Yet many accounts suggest that the cube was the hidden altar beneath the visible one. In Babylon, sacrifices were not simply to Marduk or Ishtar, but to the principle of Saturn, time that must be fed. In the Hebrew scriptures, echoes of binding sacrifice remain, from Abraham lifting Isaac to the temple rites that demanded offerings of lambs. Each act mirrored a deeper current. To appease the order of Saturn, blood must flow. In esoteric traditions, this practice evolved into symbolic offerings rather than literal ones. The cube became a mental construct, and instead of pouring blood, adepts offered their will, their desires, their attachment. In certain strands of Kabbalah, the cube aligns with Malkuth, the kingdom, the material world that must be sanctified. But to sanctify the world required sacrifice, ego, pleasure, or sometimes the literal life force. Mystics whispered that those who knew how to direct such offerings through ritual gained power, not because the gods demanded blood, but because Saturn's law consumes energy and returns it in altered form. What you gave up into the cube became fuel for transformation. Pause here. The modern reflection of this truth is unsettling. Great black cube monuments stand in cities like Mecca, New York, and Copenhagen, sometimes adored, sometimes ignored, yet always resonating with the same ancient archetype. Pilgrims circle the Kaaba, pouring their devotion into its cubic form. And though this is framed as worship of the divine, the geometry itself acts as a container, an absorber of collective energy. What was once blood has now become intention, prayer, and life force. Some esotericists warn that Saturn's cube has always thrived on sacrifice. Whether the spilling of lambs, the submission of human will, or the pouring of millions of souls into synchronized ritual. And so the cube endures not only as a sacred shape, but as a portal of offering. It is where the hidden pact of humanity with time and structure is sealed. The question is never whether sacrifice is required. It is always, what are you willing to give? In every society, the architecture of justice carries with it a silent sermon. Step into almost any courtroom and you will see it immediately. The geometry of order framed as a cube. The benches, the judge's dais. The very courtroom itself is often a box. 4 walls, squared edges, and a ceiling pressing down with silent authority. The cube here is not accidental. It reflects the desire of law to appear absolute, immovable, and eternal. A judge in black robes sits elevated, encased within this squared chamber, representing both the boundary of human order and the echo of an ancient archetype. The cube is not only stone and wood, but a projection of how justice is imagined, fixed, impartial, and beyond human emotion. Yet within that structure, fallible men and women decide the destinies of others. Pause for a moment and feel the weight of that paradox. The symbolism of the cube in law is older than the modern courtroom. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi was etched in stone pillars, squared in form, symbolizing laws carved into permanence. In medieval Europe, court chambers were often constructed in rectilinear fashion to distinguish them from the circular spaces of ritual or the domed architecture of faith. The cube was the shape of the rational, the measurable, the world where judgment could be meted out not by gods, but by men. This choice reflects a subtle yet profound statement. In the square, truth is decided and order is maintained. Black robes, too, add to this symbolism. They are the garment of shadow, anonymity, and impartiality, dissolving the individual into the larger role of authority. The judge becomes faceless within the cube, an embodiment of law rather than a singular person. Consider the ways in which a defendant experiences this structure. They enter a box, are placed behind a table that cages them within another smaller box, and rise to speak before a robed figure elevated above them. The cube here is psychological as much as architectural. It creates containment, a theatre where power dynamics are amplified by geometry. Modern courtrooms, particularly in the West, still carry this design. Think of the US Supreme Court. The chamber is box-like, heavy with rectangular columns, squared marble benches, and a sense of eternal weight. Every line is deliberate, every angle suggesting that law is not fluid but rigid. Justice, as symbolized here, is not a flowing river, but a cube of stone. And yet, even within these walls, cracks appear. Laws change, verdicts are overturned, injustices are recognized in hindsight. The cube that promises absolute balance often becomes the cube of entrapment, where the marginalized feel crushed beneath its weight. Philosophers like Michel Foucault noted that systems of justice are as much about control as they are about truth, and the geometry of their spaces reflects this. The cube is both altar and prison. It reassures us with its structure, while reminding us of its power to confine. In this way, the courtroom cube reveals itself as judge not only of people, but of civilization itself, reflecting back what we believe justice to be, and what it too often becomes. The cube, in its unyielding geometry, carries a whisper that goes beyond architecture and beyond religion. It has become a symbol of the very matrix in which humanity is ensnared. At first glance, the cube is a shape of stability, a perfect form with its equal sides and sharp edges. Yet beneath that balance lies an implication of confinement. 6 walls, no windows, no escape. And so, the cube becomes a metaphor for the prison of perception. From birth, the individual is introduced into a system built upon invisible cubes, of law, of economy, of religion, of culture. Each one framed as order, but each one serving as a barrier to expansion. The matrix of control reveals itself through these structures. Think of the cityscape, block after block of cubic towers, each one a compartment for human labor and human rest. Or consider the classroom, a box where the child sits within 4 walls, their mind molded into predictable patterns. Even in the digital age, the screen, a glowing square, becomes the lens through which reality is filtered. The cube is everywhere, and it does not simply stand as a shape, but as a living metaphor of how consciousness is boxed in. The Saturnian associations of the cube deepen this symbolism. Saturn, long known as the Lord of Time, of boundaries, of restriction, casts its shadow through this geometry. The cube becomes the crystallization of time, the slowing of infinite flow into rigid segments. And so, what is infinite is made finite. What is expansive is compressed. Just as the soul longs for the circle, eternal, boundless, the system presents the cube, the prison that mimics stability while enforcing limitation. It is the architecture of control masquerading as order. The cube is also a code, a hologram of this false matrix. Ancient esoteric traditions have suggested that reality itself is structured as a kind of geometric web. When the cube appears, it is a reminder that we are not seeing the totality, but only a program. The cube reduces, compresses, and translates what is infinite into something small enough to dominate. In the language of the Hermetists, this is illusion. Maya crystallized into matter, and the danger lies in mistaking the walls for reality. Yet awareness transforms the cube. To the sleeping mind, it is a prison. To the awakened, it becomes a mirror. Every block, every system, every structure that seems immovable reveals its true nature when questioned, that it was never solid at all. The cube is an idea, and an idea can be dissolved. When we see the cube as a symbol of control, we begin to find its cracks. The matrix begins to lose its power, not through rebellion, but through recognition. And so, in the stillness of reflection, the cube offers a choice. Remain within its walls, safe but confined, or step beyond its edges into the spiral, the circle, the infinite. The cube is the matrix of control, but it is also the invitation to transcend it. They say the cube is made of stone, but those who have touched its walls insist it is woven of thought. For centuries, mystics across cultures have described awakening not as the gaining of something new, but as the shattering of an invisible prison. Walls made not of iron or brick, but of perception. The cube has always been the symbol of enclosure, of limitation. And yet, every so often, a human being has risen who managed to break it. Consider the ancient desert mystic who sat beneath the scorching sun until his mind dissolved into silence. The villagers thought he had gone mad, but when he returned, his words carried the force of thunder. He spoke of seeing a lattice around all things, a geometric net that trapped thought, desire, and identity. And then, he said, he had stepped outside of it, not with his body, but with his awareness. He called it the breaking of the cube. His story mirrors the Upanishadic sages of India, who taught that the world of appearances, or Maya, is a binding illusion. To awaken is to pierce the veil and realize the self beyond the structure. In the Christian mystical tradition, Meister Eckhart described something similar. He spoke of a breaking away from the created order, where the soul detaches from every form, every image, and every concept, until only the infinite Godhead remains. Eckhart said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." That is the dissolving of the cube. The sense of separation shatters, and the prisoner realizes he was never bound to begin with. In Sufi teachings, the poet Rumi painted the cube in poetic disguise. He wrote of the prison of the mind and the walls that surround us, only to urge, break your chains if you can. Come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. The cube, in Sufi language, is the limitation of time and form. The breaking is surrender, the step into ecstatic union where walls no longer matter. Modern accounts echo the same theme. Near-death experiences often describe leaving their bodies and suddenly seeing reality from a higher vantage point. They report perceiving the world as a kind of structured field, a grid or matrix, and then moving beyond it into a realm of boundless light. Psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Moody, in his seminal book, Life After Life, documented these testimonies, many of which contain imagery of breaking through barriers of form before merging with something infinite. And there are the shamans of the Amazon who drink the bitter brew of ayahuasca and tell of the cube-like patterns that first emerge. At the start of the journey, they see walls of geometry, a prison of fractal lines. But with guidance they move through them, into realms of open spirit. Breaking the cube is never about destruction. It is about seeing through the illusion of confinement. The cube has always been a teaching tool, a riddle, a mirror. And those who shattered its walls did not end up in chaos. They ended up in freedom. The cube, in sacred geometry, has long been seen as the archetype of structure, containment, and order. It is the perfect form of matter, 6 sides bound in symmetry, representing stability and permanence. Yet mystics across cultures have warned that this very symbol, when misused, becomes the prison of the soul. In esoteric traditions, the cube is not just a shape but a metaphor for the false matrix that overlays reality, a crystallization of spirit into limitation. When the soul incarnates into matter, it accepts the cube as its container. But the danger arises when the soul forgets it can move beyond it. The cube becomes not a temple, but a cage. The pineal gland, revered by ancient cultures as the seat of the soul, is the organ most associated with piercing beyond this cube of limitation. In Hindu texts, it is symbolized by the Ajna chakra, the third eye, a gateway into higher perception. In Egyptian mysticism, it was encoded into the Eye of Horus, a sacred geometry of inner vision. René Descartes, centuries later, echoed this same idea when he described the pineal gland as the interface between spirit and body. Yet in the modern world, the pineal has been calcified, numbed, and dulled, an inner eye bound by the cube of material conditioning. To understand how the cube blocks higher consciousness, we must look at both metaphysics and science. The cube represents order and linearity, but higher consciousness is non-linear, flowing like a sphere or a spiral. The pineal gland operates not through logic or sequence, but through resonance and vibrational sensitivity. Studies show it secretes dimethyltryptamine, DMT, in small amounts, a substance often called the spirit molecule, capable of producing visions that dissolve the boundaries of time and space. Mystics suggest that when the pineal is fully awakened, the cube dissolves, and consciousness perceives directly the interconnected web of existence. But the false systems of power have always sought to maintain the cube. Through cultural conditioning, industrial diets, fluoride exposure, and endless distraction, the pineal is suppressed, making it harder for the soul to glimpse the light beyond the cage. Plato's allegory of the cave reflects this truth. The shadows on the wall keep humanity staring forward, never realizing the light comes from behind. The cube is this same shadow construct, binding vision to the flat and the measurable, while blinding the eye to the infinite. Mystics who liberated their pineal from the cube's grip often described a dramatic shift. They spoke of colors more vivid than earthly light, of soundless tones ringing from beyond, of a radiance that was both within and without. The yogis called this turiya, the fourth state, beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Gnostics described it as seeing past the demiurge's trap into the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. The pineal gland is not just a physical organ, but the antenna of the soul, and when aligned, it bends the bars of the cube. The cube blocks by making the false seem real, but the pineal reveals that the real was never bound. The eye in the center of the brain can pierce the veil, dissolving walls into windows, and what once appeared as solid stone becomes radiant light. The mystics remind us, the cube is an illusion of permanence. Consciousness was never meant to be trapped inside, it was always meant to pass through. In the teachings of the ancients, time was not just the ticking of a clock, but a prison of cycles, a wheel upon which souls were bound to spin endlessly. The cube, symbol of Saturn, represents the crystallization of energy, the dense form of matter, and the heavy hand of karma. To the Gnostics, Saturn was Kronos, the devourer of his own children, a ruler who imposed boundaries, contracts, and inevitabilities. And what is karma, if not the unseen architecture of this cube, pressing upon the soul, demanding balance, but also chaining it to return again and again? Mystics spoke of this prison in veiled words. In Hindu cosmology, the wheel of samsara is a relentless turning, a cycle of birth and death, binding consciousness in illusion until liberation is attained. Saturn becomes the gatekeeper of this wheel, the one who locks the gates of time and demands that every action be weighed and balanced before release is possible. The cube is not evil in itself. It is law, structure, cause, and effect solidified into form. But for the soul still unawakened, it becomes the greatest trap. For every lifetime is another turn, another lesson, another entanglement in the net of matter. The pineal gland, the seat of perception, is clouded under Saturn's heavy frequency. And so, the soul forgets. It forgets that beyond karma there is grace. It forgets that beyond the cube there is the circle, the eternal, the timeless. And so, karma becomes not just correction, but entrapment, repeating until awareness cracks the pattern. In Hermetic tradition, this prison was described as the Lords of Fate, archonic rulers who enforce the cosmic laws with merciless precision. They are not personal enemies, but enforcers of a contract the soul itself entered. Like Saturn, they measure and bind, insisting that nothing passes through the veil without balance. But mystics tell of ways to break free. The Sufi master Rumi spoke of dying before death, of escaping the wheel by surrendering into love, which dissolves karma as fire dissolves wax. In Buddhism, the awakened one is said to burn away karma through insight, breaking the binding law of Saturn and stepping into nirvana, the state beyond cause and effect. Even in Christian mysticism, the grace of Christ is described as the breaking of the law, the offering of release from endless return through remembrance of divine origin. Saturn's cube is the teacher, but also the jailer. It shapes lifetimes, enforcing lessons until mastery is found. Yet, If one realizes that karma is not punishment but mirror, the cube loosens. The soul begins to see that each repetition is a chance to step out of reaction and into freedom. It is not the cube that must be destroyed, but the identification with its walls. For when the soul knows itself as timeless, karma has no more claim. Thus, the cycle ends not by force, but by awareness. And in that awareness, the cube of Saturn crumbles, revealing not a prison, but a passage, a doorway through which the soul steps, not bound by time, but sovereign, luminous, and free. The image of the cube has always carried a strange magnetism in the human imagination. To some, it is a prison, a structure of rigid edges and defined corners, a geometry that locks spirit into form. But to others, the cube becomes something else entirely when it is transmuted from shadow to light. Where the black cube has been used as a symbol of control, gravity, and suppression of higher awareness, the white cube appears as its inversion, a place not of captivity, but of purification, transcendence, and ultimate freedom. Imagine standing in a white cube, every wall radiant yet transparent, every angle dissolving not into restriction, but into expansion. The very geometry that once confined now becomes a gateway. The same form that pressed consciousness down into limitation can, when inverted, lift it toward the infinite. Cultures throughout history have recognized this duality, though often in veiled ways. In esoteric traditions, light and dark are not opposites warring with each other, but reflections of the same principle seen at different stages of evolution. The alchemist spoke of solve et coagula, to dissolve and to bind, as necessary forces. The cube represents the coagulated, the bound, the crystallized. But when transfigured into its luminous counterpart, it becomes the vessel through which spirit dissolves all illusion. In the white cube, the density of matter is purified, not rejected, and used as the very ladder through which transcendence is climbed. The paradox is that the soul does not escape the cube, it redeems it. If you look at modern art and architecture, the white cube is often the gallery space itself, pristine, silent, a room in which perception is sharpened. Scholars like Brian O'Doherty have written of the white cube as the temple of modernity, a place designed to dissolve distraction so that consciousness is free to encounter the art directly. Though secular in intent, the resonance is clear. The white cube is purification through minimalism, through stripping away of the unnecessary until only essence remains. In a spiritual sense, the white cube functions in the same way. It erases the noise of the conditioned world so that the higher frequencies of being can be perceived. Mystics have long described transcendence as a passage through light. Tibetan teachings of the Bardo Todol speak of the clear light, dazzling and overwhelming, which appears at the moment of death and offers liberation to those who can recognize it without fear. Kabbalistic traditions speak of the divine light that shatters vessels, yet also forms the matrix of creation. The white cube, then, can be seen as a symbolic container for that light, a structure that holds the unholdable, a geometric metaphor for the ineffable. Its edges mark out space, yet within that space lies a freedom unbounded. To step into the white cube is to step into surrender. It is to accept that purification is not about erasing the self, but about allowing all that is not eternal to fall away. It is not an escape from reality, but an awakening into the truth that reality itself was never solid. Just as the black cube pressed the pineal gland into dormancy, the white cube bathes it in radiance, awakening its perception of higher consciousness. In this light, the mind no longer sees separation. it sees wholeness. No longer trapped in the prison of illusion, the soul breathes freely, remembering its origin. Close your eyes and imagine sitting in silence, the world falling away, until only the steady rhythm of your breath remains. In this stillness, many traditions teach the cube as more than a symbol. It becomes a tool, a living geometry, and a guide for consciousness itself. When mystics of old spoke of sacred architecture, they weren't only referring to temples or pyramids. They were describing a geometry that could be built within the mind, a temple of form designed to hold awareness steady. The cube, with its equal sides and unshakable balance, becomes a mirror of stability. In meditation, some schools instructed initiates to visualize themselves sitting inside a perfect cube of light, its edges glowing, its 6 faces enclosing them in harmony. This visualization was not meant to trap the soul, but to center it, to still the restless wandering of thoughts. The cube became a container for presence. Pause for a moment. Notice how even the idea of the cube brings a sense of structure, a grounding. The body relaxes into its symmetry. The mind feels anchored. Esoteric traditions across East and West spoke of this. In certain branches of Hindu yantra meditation, the cube appears as a bhupura, the square boundary that contains a mandala, marking sacred space. In Tibetan Buddhism, mandalas often begin with a square, the 4 directions forming the foundation before rising into higher complexity. And in Western mysticism, Hermetic practitioners would imagine the cube as the prima materia of the mind, the raw ground where higher alchemy can unfold. The message is the same. Start with stability, then ascend. Breathing into the cube, practitioners were taught to feel its 6 directions, front and back, left and right, above and below. With each breath, awareness would expand evenly in all directions, creating an unshakable presence. If the mind drifted into distraction, the cube structure pulled it gently back, reminding the soul of balance. Some teachers warned that without this stabilizing work, attempts at transcendence could unground the seeker, scattering them across illusions. The cube was the anchor that made flight possible. But there is another layer. For the advanced student, the cube was not only a container but also a door. Once stability was established, the meditator could dissolve the cube itself, watching its edges fade into light, its solid form melt into spaciousness. This dissolution became a metaphor for transcending the boundaries of time and matter. The cube that first held the soul steady was now unbuilt, revealing infinite openness. Just as a child first learns to walk within the safety of walls before stepping into the vastness of the world, so too did consciousness train within the cube before venturing into the unbounded. Pause again. Breathe. Imagine yourself inside such a cube now. Feel its quiet strength holding you, protecting you. And then, with the next breath, imagine its walls dissolving into pure radiance. This is the paradox. The cube that grounds is also the cube that liberates. Geometry is meditation. Form leading to formlessness. A simple square rising into infinity. The cube has always been a paradox. From the first moment we encounter it in myth, ritual, or architecture, it presents itself as both a boundary and a doorway. It is solid, immovable, symmetrical, unyielding, a perfect prison for the senses. Yet hidden within those rigid lines lies the very geometry of liberation. The ancients who studied sacred number knew this. The cube is 6, the number of matter, of limitation, of form. But unfold it, flatten it, and the cube reveals the cross, the pattern of expansion, the path toward resurrection. What traps you is also what sets you free. The cube, in this way, is not merely an object. It is a mirror of the human condition itself. Mystics across traditions have hinted at this duality. In Jewish mysticism, the cube becomes the Holy of Holies, a perfect cube within Solomon's temple, sealed off from all but the high priest. It was a place of tremendous weight and fear, yet it was also the space where heaven touched earth, where the ineffable name of God vibrated into presence. In Islamic tradition, the Kaaba, the black cube of Mecca, is the center around which millions orbit in ritual devotion. On one level, it represents submission, enclosure, surrender. On another, it is the axis of the cosmos, the pole around which the universe spins, drawing the seeker into alignment with divine order. Both the Holy of Holies and the Kaaba show us the cube as the paradox of concealment and revelation, both prison and teacher. Even in the Gnostic currents, we see this theme. The cube is sometimes described as the architect's trap, the demiurge's symbol of confinement, binding the soul in the illusion of matter. Yet that same geometry becomes the structure the soul must master, a test designed to awaken hidden faculties of perception. It is not the cube that deceives. It is our attachment to it, our belief that its walls are final. The moment we realize the cube is a lesson, not a sentence, it begins to dissolve before our eyes. What seemed heavy becomes weightless. What seemed eternal becomes fleeting. The cube whispers, "This was never about your cage. It was about your sight." Alchemists spoke of solve et coagula, to dissolve and to bind. The cube is coagula, the binding, the fixing of spirit into matter. But within that same structure is the invitation to dissolve, to break open its faces and see the infinite beyond. Carl Jung even suggested that the cube is an archetype of integration, where the opposites of confinement and transcendence are united. It is the crucible in which the ego is both trapped and refined until it can finally yield to the self, the deeper spirit within. Perhaps this is the cube's final secret, that there was never any prison at all, only the illusion of walls around infinite space. The soul steps into the cube, struggles, presses against its edges, feels confined. But with every trial, every limitation, the cube teaches resilience, vision, detachment. It pushes the soul to grow beyond the cage, and at last, when the lesson is understood, the cube opens, not by breaking, but by revealing. It was always made of light. Prison and teacher, boundary and threshold, the cube leaves us with one truth. The walls you fear most are the very walls designed to set you free. When we speak of the cube as symbol, we are not merely describing geometry. We are pointing to a condition, a binding, a container that holds the soul in form. For ages, mystics and philosophers have whispered of this structure, not only as the cornerstone of physical reality, but as the prison of perception itself. The cube is solidity, limitation, the crystallization of divine energy into matter. It is the walls of time, the 6 directions that frame existence. Yet every prison is destined to collapse when its purpose has been fulfilled. The shattering of the cube is the vision of an age to come, when spirit no longer consents to remain bound by rigid forms, and consciousness overflows its edges to remember its boundless source. In Hermetic thought, matter was seen as the condensation of mind, the densification of the infinite into form. This condensation was necessary. It gave us ground to stand on, laws to learn, and resistance to shape our growth. But mystics like Plotinus warned that clinging to form is the great mistake of the soul. In the writings of the Nag Hammadi codices, the archons are described as forces that delight in keeping humanity trapped in the mechanical cycles of material existence. They would have the cube remain unbroken. Yet in nearly every mystical tradition, there is the promise of an ending, a cosmic renewal in which these structures lose their grip, and spirit recalls its origin in the infinite pleroma. The shattering of the cube is not the destruction of reality, but its transfiguration. It is the unveiling of the truth that the cube was never ultimate, only a temporary scaffolding to teach the soul how to walk. Just as the seed shell cracks when the plant bursts forth, so too will the cube dissolve when the spirit grows beyond the need for boundaries. This imagery echoes in Christian scripture. Behold, I make all things new. Revelation 21, verse 5. It is found in the Hindu pralaya, the great dissolution when the worlds are withdrawn back into the divine source. It is present in Mayan prophecy, which spoke of cycles of ages collapsing, only to usher in a higher octave of consciousness. Each culture, with its own tongue, hinted at the same truth, that limitation is never the end. The cube must eventually fracture. In meditation, when one experiences glimpses beyond self, there is often a sense of walls dissolving, edges softening, a falling away of form. This is the soul rehearsing the shattering of the cube. The walls were never as strong as they seemed. They existed only in perception. And when perception shifts, the prison opens like a paper cage. The modern mystic would say that even physics is leaning this way. Quantum mechanics reminds us that matter is not solid but probability, not locked but open, not cube but wave. The solidity we take for granted is a perception created by consciousness. When consciousness remembers itself, solidity dissolves. The coming age is not the victory of one civilization over another. It is not the triumph of technology or empire. It is the moment when the cube can no longer contain the expanding frequency of spirit. The prophets called it the Great Awakening. The Buddhists saw it as the dawn of nirvana, and the Hermeticists described it as return to the One. To shatter the cube is not destruction, but liberation. The soul will not merely step outside its prison. It will realize there was never a prison at all, and in that moment, infinity is remembered. There comes a moment when the cube, with all its weight of illusion and all its walls of time, is no longer a structure you fear, nor even one you resist. It becomes clear that the cube was never the destination, only the classroom. The patterns of suffering, the cycles of birth and death, the endless repetition of choice and consequence, these were the lessons carved into the stone of existence. And now, as the age shifts, the great truth begins to shimmer like light through cracks in the walls. You were never meant to remain here. You were meant to awaken, to transcend, and to guide others out of this labyrinth of mirrors. The mission beyond the cube is not escape for its own sake. It is not about abandoning the physical, nor about rejecting the realm of form. It is about remembering that the form was always temporary, a shadow projected by the eternal flame. Mystical traditions have always whispered of this task. The Upanishads speak of the soul as the traveler moving from one life to another until it realizes its own identity with the eternal Brahman. Hermetic texts remind us, as above, so below, as within, so without. They were not pointing to power within the walls, but to the realization that walls themselves dissolve when awareness awakens to its source. And so you feel the calling. Not the pull of desire, not the itch of ambition, but the unmistakable call of remembrance. You begin to see that your presence here was never an accident. The cube is vast, yes, but its collapse is inevitable. and the souls who awaken early become the lantern bearers for those still stumbling in the dark corridors. This is why you are here. To transcend is not to vanish, but to shine as a beacon, reminding others of their own infinite essence. The ancients often describe this role as that of the psychopomp, the one who guides souls through the veil. In Egyptian lore, it was Anubis weighing the heart against the feather. In Tibetan texts, it was the Lama reading the instructions of the Bardo Thodol, whispering guidance to the departing soul. In our age, it is you, the awakened one, who becomes that guide. Not in robes or ritual necessarily, but in the quiet power of your being, your words, your presence. Every act of compassion, every moment of stillness, every truth you dare to speak, breaks a piece of the cube for another. The mission beyond the cube is not small, nor is it optional. It is the reason you are born into this shifting age. You are here to remind others that what they fear as death is a doorway. What they mistake as loss is transformation. What they cling to as real was always the shadow of a greater reality. And as you walk forward, you carry not only yourself beyond the cube, but the memory of countless souls who long to remember their own infinite state. This is the mission: to awaken, to transcend, to guide, and in doing so, to become what you always were, a living fragment of the infinite, now aware of its own light. And now, as we step out of the cube together, I want to leave you with this. This journey doesn't end here. It continues with every question you ask, every truth you uncover, and every path you walk beyond illusion. If this message resonated with your soul, don't let it vanish into silence. Stay with us on this voyage. Watch the next video waiting for you, because every piece builds the greater map of awakening. Subscribe, so you never miss the hidden truths that were meant to reach you. Comment below. Share what opened inside you during this video. Your voice, your reflection, matters. And if you felt this light stir something within, share it with someone who is ready to remember. Like this video, because every small action carries energy, and together, that energy becomes a movement. This is not just a channel. This is the hidden voyage, and the journey is only beginning. Welcome home, Soul Whisper and Soul Creator. The Hidden Voyage.